It's so wonderful to be back here amongst so many friendly, familiar faces, so many new faces, those out there in TV land, or who'll be watching it after the fact. I always learn things in each and every congregation that I speak in. Not quite sure to do with the line, God's amusement park. Theme park, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to work on that a little bit. Can we have the first slide, please? Okay. So today's presentation, which is going to be an unusual presentation for me on many levels, and for those of you listening, the title is, Does Israel Even Matter? Come on now. You've got to wait a minute. The thing that's interesting is this presentation is very unusual on many levels. Number one, what normally happens is I set a date to come to the States and speak. And I get a number of invitations. Never enough. That's a subtle hint. I pay for the airfare. It's all set. And about 3 or 4 weeks before, it finally hits me what it is that I should be presenting this time. I come up with a bunch of ideas. Troy LeBlanc, my media guru, puts together the PowerPoint for me. Off I go. That's not what happened with this presentation. This presentation came to me last July and August while I was here in America. So never before have I felt compelled to teach on a topic so far in advance. And never before have I written, rewritten, changed, edited, tore up, started all over a presentation. So where did this idea come from? It came from the fact that, now you have to remember, I began coming back to America to speak to groups in August of 2013. It's been more than 10 years now. Of course, there was the little interlude of COVID, but I used to come back 3, 4, and even 5 times in a year. Now it's only 2, thank God. My arms get so tired making my way over the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. And then, you know, this may be a shock. You know, here we are in Florida. I don't know if you realize, but winters across the U.S. are not like in Florida. The old country, which for me was New York City, is experiencing a winter the coldest in, they tell me, 20 years. It wouldn't have been so bad if that really puffy, warm, long Eddie Bauer winter coat that I had and donated to a homeless shelter in New York years ago, I still had. So it was cold. So Florida's lovely. But this presentation, so I'm going around in July and August, and I began encountering people who were unable to articulate what their personal and what their congregational position on Israel actually was. Now, I generally speak to congregations, the majority, who would describe themselves as Hebrew roots or Messianic. But I have to tell you, on this trip already, I've spoken at one Methodist church and one Baptist church, and none of those folks have any problem understanding why they should be standing with Israel. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is those folks that I had encountered. Now, when you're sitting and having a Shabbat dinner with leadership, and you ask the question, why is it that a congregation that would consider itself Hebrew roots or Messianic, which means they have a focus on the Torah, somehow can't seem to be able to say where and how and why they feel regarding Israel and the Jewish people. It was an incredibly uncomfortable series of moments. But you can knock me down, but you can't keep me down. Ironically, what is going on in Israel now was not even an element of my worst nightmare when this presentation began being put together. We are living and experiencing things on a level right now that are astounding. We're going to go more and more into it, but when I first came up with this idea, I thought, well, I'm going to enumerate every reference to Israel in the entire Torah. Because again, when you think about it, why should people be wrestling about where they stand regarding Israel? I mean, if you're studying the Torah, the first 5 books, the books of Moses, first 5, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. When you enter the land, as you enter the land, while you're in the land, all the mitzvot, all the commandments relating to the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, all the commandments relating to agriculture in the land, Shemitah, the sabbatical. So, is it really necessary for me to come and have to tell you? Yeah. Next slide, please. The Torah is all about Israel. This is the spot on earth that Hashem, that God chose to rest his presence forever. He says it. Next slide, please. This may surprise you that I put this up. The Torah is not all about the Jews. It's not. Now, earlier today, the term chosen people was mentioned. I struggle with that term. I actually think the term might be better served as described as the choosing people. Here's another element, though. What is it that the Jewish people, part of all the people of Israel. Now, again, when I say all the people of Israel, I'm talking about, we know the prophets of Israel have told us unequivocally that all of the tribes of Israel would be returned. All those 2,700 years ago who were sent off into exile to be punished in Assyria, that they would eventually be brought back. However, as of today, the only part of the people of Israel that we can readily identify are the Jewish people. Right now. The Jewish people, people of Israel, have been tasked, or if you insist on the term, chosen to bring the Torah and its message to the world. Got to tell y'all, we've suffered greatly for it, but that's the chosenness element. And let's be very, very clear. I'm really glad that Pastor Nick mentioned about the fact that I live in Modi'in, Israel's newest city, the home of the Maccabees. Because had the Maccabees not been successful in defeating the Syrian Greeks, okay, we're talking about getting close now on 2,300 years. It's been a long time. There never would have been a woman by the name of Miriam, Mary, and her son Yeshua. Flat out. The Torah and the Jewish people were on the verge of being eradicated from the earth. Next slide, please. Okay. If you want to know what God is doing in the world, you need to look over and see what's happening to us. How much more so now with what's actually happening in the world. We're going to talk specifically about Israel a little later on. But again, the message of the Torah and all that it offers. You know, America used to like to describe itself as a Judeo-Christian nation, drawing its strength from the Torah, again, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. Where America stands on that now is a different talk, and it's not going to be me, the one delivering it. Never the guy without skin in the game. Although a little later, if you remind me, I'll tell you what it was like being in Texas before coming to Florida with what's going on in Texas. Kind of an Israeli opinion of things. Okay, I'm looking at the clocks in the back, and I have no idea if I'm on running time or when I expire. I've never been a fan of what, the media team used to do and hold up those obnoxious signs saying you've got like 6.5 minutes left. But I'm hoping someone back there will figure some way of telling me what time it is and how much time I have left. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a little provocative thing. Do you believe in prophecy or fantasy? What do I mean? You say you believe in prophecy, but let's talk about it. Let's dissect it. Let's pull that apart a little bit. There are some people who watch the news holding their Bible in the hand, and they're trying to figure out what the talking head is saying and how that affects, back and forth. Meaning, when they hear, well, the dictator of Turkey, Erdogan, when he says something, oh, well, wait a second, Turkey, that's part of Gog and Magog, and this is the final. Like, people want to know, like, do I really have to pay my phone bill? Or, is the world going to be over by then? I'm sorry, that's fantasy. That's not prophecy. We live at a time, however, when prophecy is truly being fulfilled and unfolding right before our eyes. However, it's incumbent upon us to recognize it, let alone to participate in it. Oh, thank you. Now I can tell. I only have 2 hours and 10 minutes left to speak. I was with a group in Israel, and I was visiting with them, and they said, Hanoch, would you get up and say a few words for us? So I got up, and it was like, I don't know, must have been like 20 minutes later, kind of shifting uncomfortably in the seat, the person who invited. I said, I'm sorry, you never give an open mic to a tour guide. You don't. You don't. You're bad. You blew it. It's now my house. I'm going to give a couple of quick examples of prophecy and see if I can show you why they speak so much to me personally. Next slide, please. Okay, I can't even read that. Okay. He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd keeps his flocks. Jeremiah 31:9. We've all read that many, many times. Have you ever stopped and said to yourself, wow, the Jewish people are the first people in the history of the entire world to have ever been exiled and returned to the exact same land, called by the exact same name, speaking the exact same language, with the exact same religious faith. We take it for granted. 76 years ago, the state of Israel wasn't taken for granted. We're living at that time, right now. Next slide, please. Yeshayahu, Isaiah 43:6. I will bring your seed from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. We all think that that's like a real end times thing. All the exiles will be in gathered. And generally, when I ask people, what do you think that means? That's what they tell me. Do you know that it's happened in our lifetime? In the 1990s, in a 10-year period of time, 1 million people from the former Soviet Union, remember the Soviet Union collapsed? Remember Gorbachev? What was it that Reagan said? Mr. Gorbachev, take down that wall, or whatever it was. We miss Reagan, don't we? Okay, we're not going to talk about that stuff. Okay, 1 million people changed the face of Israel. Okay, 1 million people in 10 years. That's an average, by the way, even though I grew up in the Bronx, I can do basic math. By the way, every once in a while, when we had tourists, when I was working, when they would have a day tour, and I'd get on the bus and I'd say to everyone, Bruchim Habayim, welcome to Israel, my name is Hanoch, I'll be your guide. And they're like, where did you learn English? And someone will say, well, you're a native English speaker. I said, no, I'm not a native English speaker. I grew up in the Bronx. We spoke something similar to English. Not quite. 10 years. That's an average of 100,000 people a year for 10 years. Israel went from a population of 3.5 million to 4, and it was amazing. Let me give you a frame of reference. The Jewish community in the United States of America, 3,500 make Aliyah, move to Israel every year. 3,500. Within 3 to 5 years, 50% of them have returned to the U.S. because life is much harder in Israel. That's insignificant. Compare that to people from the former Soviet Union. When I made Aliyah, when I moved to Israel in 2009, the ATM machines in Modi'in were in 3 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, and Russian. Niet. English came 5 years later in 2014 in Modi'in. That's the difference. We're going to talk a little later about populations and immigration statistics and things like that. Next slide, please. Yechezkel, Ezekiel, have brought you up out of your graves, and I will put my spirit in you. Okay, that's a typo. And you will live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and performed it. That's the prophecy of the dry bones. We in Israel see that as Jewish communities throughout the world devastated, destroyed, where their survivors have come to Israel and rebuilt the country. Now, I know many of you are probably thinking in your mind, I'm referring to the Shoah, the Holocaust, European Jews. Not just. 1.5 million Jews from Arab Muslim countries were expelled, were chased out. There was a pogrom. This is unbelievable. And Israel, in 1948, there were 600,000 Jews in my country. Today, there's 7 million. We have the highest birth rate of any developed country in the world, Jewish birth rate. Next slide, please. Okay. Zechariah, thus says the Lord of hosts, old men and old women will yet again dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and the streets of the city will be full of boys and girls playing in its streets. Zechariah 8:4. Anyone who's ever been to Israel, and there have been more than a few of you who've been there with me, walk in the old city of Jerusalem, and what you notice is unbelievable. First of all, if you go early enough in the morning, you see the little kids going to school. And they go like steps. What do I mean? The oldest kid maybe she's 8, has got the little siblings along with him, strolling through the streets. You see the elderly people of all ages. Why is it so significant? Because when Zechariah delivered that prophecy from Hashem, from the Lord, the ruins of the temple were behind him. The Romans had destroyed the temple, had been occupying our country, keeping us under a clenched fist. The idea that at some point in the future there would be Jewish life again in Israel was something people couldn't even imagine. They couldn't even conceive of it. There was no conception whatsoever. I'm running out of euphemisms, so we better go to the next slide, please. Okay, show of hands. Who has worked with Hayovel? We have a mini forest of hands. This is unbelievable. Hayovel. Okay, let's read the prophecy first. You will yet plant vines upon the mountains of Shomron, Samaria. The planters will plant and enjoy the fruit. By the way, that's the amazing wines. Jeremiah 31:5. This seemed like one of those, kind of, if you wish upon a star. Because for over 1,200 years of Muslim occupation of our country, there were no vineyards. None. Not a single one. Because as you know, Muslims do not drink alcohol. So what did it took? What did it took? I told you from the Bronx. You got to cut me some slack. Yo, now you just can't leave. Exactly. What did it take? It took a couple of crazy Jews who said, I'm going to learn how to make wine. I'm going to create a vineyard where there hasn't been one. And not only them, but then you had a couple of really crazy Christian volunteers from all over the world who went. And they're going for the pruning, and they're going for the planting, and they're, did y'all realize when you had your hands in the dirt that it was the prophet calling you to do that? It's unbelievable. And even I, who don't drink much wine at all, our wines are gold medal award-winning wines in worldwide blind test tasting competitions. Because if they knew it was Israel, we'd get the thumbs down. So we even beat the French. Flu, flu, flu. Yeah. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And, when I say to groups, normally what I do is I ask a question of who here has been to Israel? And I did that, I think, about a year ago here. And I looked around and I, did the best math I could. And it was close to 70 to 80% of everyone that was sitting here had been to Israel. I mean, really, I thought it was in the Twilight Zone. I thought it was back home. Wait, how is this possible? And there was another congregation I went to that had similar numbers. And there were only 2 people in the whole congregation that had ever been to Israel. And when I've been pleading with people to start an Israel fund, believe me, Israel's expensive. And we don't have Costco. We don't even have Walmart. Neither did New York, so that doesn't really matter. But understand something. Everyone here should be saving for that next trip to Israel. If you sit around and simply say, well, when the Lord makes a way, I will go. Well, the Lord has made a way. It's called El Al. It's our national airline, which now flies direct from Miami. Benvenido a Miami. Yeah, not that far away. Not that close, as I found out a few years ago. But it's unbelievable. But we are called upon to be actively involved. That's the whole thing. I was with the Beit Tehila tour, the last tour. It wasn't a 3-hour tour. It was a wonderful time. And, many of you were there. We were on Har Bracha, the Mount of Blessing, the headquarters of Hayovel. And we spoke to Tommy Waller. Actually, Tommy spoke to us. And Tommy said something that has really, really stuck with me. He looks at Beit Tehila, and he said, we Christians wait for prophecy to happen. We pray for it, and we wait patiently. He points out the window, and he said, the Jews are out there doing prophecy. That's the difference. No one ever told you to study your Bible and do absolutely nothing. We live in an era where action is becoming more and more required. Next slide, please. This is my favorite question, because I always make people uncomfortable, it seems. The Jew from Israel with the Bronx accent. Someone recently, by the way, said, I don't believe that you were from New York City. You sound too intelligent. Having worked at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, I remember the phrase, yo, you don't like it? I'll take you outside and show you beaten. What about salvation? What about salvation? Weren't you waiting for your Israeli Jewish tour guide to come and talk to you about your salvation? Why not? First of all, I'm going to share with you one of the most powerful things I ever heard. On my first speaking tour in America, this is August 2013, people set me up to speak at a Baptist church in Millbrook, Alabama, really small town. Pastor Jared Decker, I'll never forget him, young guy, very sweet. One little funny anecdote is I happened to notice he had a Glock 9mm stuck in his back waistband. So I guess he saw me looking at it, but he misinterpreted it. Because he said to me, you're probably not used to clergy packing. I said, well, where I live, the rabbis have M4 carbines and M16s, but you're cool, it's fine. At the end of my talk, he asked me for my permission to say a few words. Pastor, it's your church. Feel free. So he got up there and he said, our salvation comes to us because of our belief in Jesus, and we're counting on that promise to be saved. And everyone went crazy. They were like, come on now, preach it. He paused, I like to say for dramatic effect, and he said, however, if the Lord Almighty does not keep the promises that he made to Israel and the Jewish people, why do we think he will keep his promises to us for our salvation? That was the drop the microphone moment before the meme was ever created. Next slide, please. So what does God want from us? He wants his name to be recognized in this world. Which, by the way, is sadly, the antithesis of the American woke approach, where it's all about me. It's not about me. And it's not the Seinfeld, it's not me, it's not you, it's me. No, it's him. Next slide, please. He wants us to act, work, and live differently. You know, are the elderly, are the widows, are the poor, the disadvantaged, are they all being taken care of? If not, don't describe yourself as religious. You're just doing the easy stuff. But this is the really hard part. He wants us to be connected. He wants us to be connected. One of the biggest curses of modern technology, the blessing and the curse, Zoom. COVID got people used to, I'm going to listen in on services today. I'm going to sit in my jammies with a nice cup of coffee and my Raisin Bran, and I'm going to participate. You're not participating. You're a voyeur. You're looking in on someone else's community. You have separated yourselves from the community, and you think you're part of it, and you think he's pleased with that. Next slide, please. This is what it's all about. We are connected to Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in the heavens. Now, since it's all about relationships, because that's what I'm talking about, relationships. What religion does God want us to observe? I know I make you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. Sometimes in a smaller group, there's someone who wants to pander to me and say, Judaism? No. In fact, Jew isn't even mentioned in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, until the Babylonian exile, the Persians' story of Esther. Come on, you guys had a musical about it. You know what I'm talking about. Okay? By the way, Jew, because Jew from Judea, in the same way that Arabs come from Arabia, not our country. Okay, a relationship. It's about relationships. Next slide, please. Is God on the move? Heck yeah. Now, the hardest thing, though, is right up front, you're not always capable of seeing what the rest of the GPS guidance is telling you to do. Okay? It's not like that option where you scroll down and you see in advance where you're going. People, want to know, like, what's the prophetic elements of what's going on in Israel right now? We'll talk about that shortly, and again at length on Monday night, but we're too much right in the middle of it to see it. We can't see the trees from the forest. Next slide, please. Okay. This is where the presentation shifts slightly. Anyone know what today's date is? Okay, so we have a vote for February 10th. Maybe here in Brandon. In Israel, it's like October 137th. Next slide. Things in Israel will never, ever, ever be the same after October 7th. By the way, that's not all necessarily bad. But what we experienced were horrors in our worst nightmares that we could ever, God forbid, conceive of. The savagery, murders weren't enough. The mass rapes, the burning of children and families alive, the pedophilia, necrophilia, unimaginable horrors. Now, never before in history has a group of people, the terrorists, filmed what they were doing on GoPro cameras. And they immediately uploaded them. They took cell phones from their victims and on Facebook Live so their families would see their relatives being tortured and murdered. Beyond belief. Monday night, we're going to talk more about this at length, and I want to share some insights of what's been happening. I know some of you have been reading it, on news sources, and I also have to stop here for a second. If you're not looking at an Israeli news source, I've got to ask you why not. You are not getting the full picture on CNN or on Fox, or someone the other day told me, well, I watch Sky News out of Australia? ¿Por qué? Why? Why, when you can go to I-24 News, jpost.com, Ynet News, Times of Israel? It's astounding to me. Someone the other day in Texas said to me, so what's going on in Israel? What's the latest? It was on Shabbat. So I said, you mean since yesterday? I don't use my phone on Shabbat. We of the Church of Latter-day Pharisees, we have our customs, and that's one of them that we don't do. So he looked at me and he said, no, like what's going on? So I said, what news source have you been reading? Well, I haven't. I wanted to slap the silly out of him. What do you mean? You're curious. You have a heart for Israel. And by the way, I'm really tired of hearing about that. People with hearts, like the Queen of Hearts, off with their head. Having a heart doesn't mean anything. Like people were asking, who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl? Who's playing? Understand, I'm not a 14-year-old kid in the Bronx anymore. None of this means anything to me. Next slide, please. Okay. My last presentation when I was here in the summer was entitled, okay, let's go back. My presentation last January, February was, how did we get here? And it was 22 historical maps explaining how the land of Israel has always belonged to the Jewish people. It was brilliant, if I must say so myself. My presentation in the summer was What's in a Name, where I gave terminology and helped define it, like Zionism, like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, a whole variety of things. By the way, this was one of them. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I then went and asked the pastors and many of the people at these congregations if they had ever heard the term before. 95% of them said they had never heard that expression. Since October 7th, you cannot open up a newspaper, not go to an online source, not go onto Instagram to a demonstration and hear that chant. People said, oh my God, you were prophetic. No, I wasn't. I was just attuned to what was happening. That's the map of Israel. By the way, homework assignment. Tonight after Shabbat, go out and buy a map of Israel. Order one online. You need to be familiar with it. Because the highly educated morons that are walking around on American college campuses today, good schools, Harvard, Penn, Cornell, Cooper Union, Columbia, they're chanting this. People walking around with signs. And what's great is you watch the videos of people going over and asking, excuse me, what river and what sea? And the response of, what does it matter? It's an expression. Is it the Mississippi? You have people say, again, there's Israel. Gaza's that strip 25 miles long on the Mediterranean. There are people say, well, the river I don't remember. I don't remember. But it's the Black Sea. Don't tell that to Vladimir Putin. He'll get really upset. Then you've got people who say, you see at the very bottom there, that little blue thing, the Gulf of Aqaba? That leads into something called the Red Sea. Okay? Remember that. See where Gaza is, see where the Red Sea is, and then you've got people saying, well, Gaza is surrounded by the Red Sea, so it must be. People have no idea. No idea what they're chanting, but it doesn't matter, because the bottom line, the common denominator, is you get to hate Jews. I cannot believe, now again, I'm a little bit of a historian, and I have to tell you, we were just talking about this earlier. I was involved in Jewish activism. I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. It was my teacher, Rabbi Meir Kahana, that coined the term never again. And it never meant never again would there be a that there wouldn't be another Holocaust. It never meant that. What it meant was never again would we be silent as this is occurring. But that's exactly what's happening. We in Israel are listening. Again, for years. I've been a guide now for 10 years. I can't tell you how many people have told me they love my country. I can't tell you how many Christians will land in Israel and begin crying. Now, there's not a single Jewish bone in any skeleton in the family closet. They say to me, why do I feel so connected? Understand, this isn't like people going to France and then saying, from now on, call me Pierre, and I'm going to wear a beret. People feel connected to Israel, but we're not hearing it. We're not seeing it. Next slide, please. And again, I'm not going over all terms now, but just a few to point things out. There is only one solution, Intifada revolution. On college campuses throughout America, people walking around chanting this. They ask them, what does Intifada mean? What does jihad mean? No idea. But it's against Jews in Israel, I'm for it. Intifada, we had 2 of them in Israel. That's a violent uprising. Some of you may remember early 2000s. I'll show you just 3 pictures to jog your memory. Next slide, please. Sabaro's Pizza. By the way, that's now Cafe Ne'eman on the corner of King George and Jaffa. You're in Jerusalem, you pass that all the time. Suicide bomber, probably best termed a homicide bomber, came in with explosives, nuts, bolts, and nails dipped in rat poison and set it off. I actually know someone that was in there at the time, Rabbi Benny Friedman, and he came in and he was sitting near the front. See where that traffic light is? The red light? He was sitting right over there. He had ordered a big ziti, and it came and it was cold. By the way, just a little tip. Don't order a big ziti in Israel. Have falafel, shawarma, sabiach, hummus, tahina. Don't order big ziti. It was cold. He went back. They had to warm it up. So by the time he got it, he went to sit back at his seat, and there was a young woman there. So he had to go sit in the back. Saved his life. She was torn apart. Next slide, please. We had buses blowing up every single day, thousands of Israeli civilians slaughtered. And this is what these college-educated kids are calling for. Next slide, please. It was unbelievable. People have told me that I'm helping now to be able to help educate people or remind them. There aren't enough people that are interested in hearing about it, though. That's what's shocking. People speak, you hear it on the news all the time at these demonstrations. You can openly call in New York City for the gassing of Jews. You probably saw the clips from that Senate hearing weeks ago when they had the presidents of MIT, Harvard, and Penn asking, is it to calling for Jewish genocide? Is that against your campus policies? Depends on the context. What kind of expression is that? It depends upon the context. What, when they start slaughtering Jews on the campus quad? That's okay. There was a period when I was a young boy when the three couples that my parents were friendliest with, it dawned on me that they were all Holocaust survivors because they all had the tattoos. None of them ever had the words below it that said it depends upon the context. It's a world that has gone upside down. If you ever read the book 1984 back in school, it's talking about a time when the world, literally has gone crazy, where you've got the ministry of peace is actually the ministry of war. So you watch these demonstrations, and I have to tell you, my daughters always caution me when I come to America for trips because they say you always get sick. I get ear infections. I miss a step and fall down and then mess up my knee and my ankle and hip and everything else. I don't get enough sleep. I eat way too much food. This time, they both expressed their concern about my safety as I travel through airports in the United States of America. Jews are not safe in this country. But understand something. The Muslims have been very, very open about this. When they finish with the Saturday people, they're coming for the Sunday people. These idiots with diplomas that will chant for the implementation of Sharia law. One of my favorite groups that comes to demonstrations regularly is a group called Queers for Palestine. And when they ask these people, why are you here at the demonstration? They'll say, well, they're here to support the queer community in Palestine. Are you unaware that in every single Muslim country in the world, gay people are killed? That's the Ralph Cramden response. Hamana, 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 hamana. No one, it's like a world gone insane. Next slide, please. Free Palestine. A country that has never existed in the history of the world. And by the way, just a reminder, but I should stop for a second. My speaking style leads some people to conclude that I was clubbing them over the head, beating them up. That is not the case. Please understand. I try to point out things and give you a different perspective. But having said that, let me be very clear. I did not come so far from home on such an expensive air ticket to amuse and entertain the sheep. I came to feed the lions for Zion. So I'm putting that right out there. So you've got the official policy of the United States government is what's called the two-state solution. That's the two-state delusion. By the way, that's been American policy from the get-go. It was Trump's policy too. When he had his deal of the century, he wanted to create a Palestine in Judea, Samaria, what the Americans insist on calling the West Bank, but as you can see, those are our eastern hills, okay? And Gaza, along with a tunnel, yet another tunnel, connecting Gaza to Judea, Samaria. That was the Trump plan. That's exactly how I feel about it. That really, it makes me want to scream. By the way, children have no filters. That's why they're always so brutally honest. Love that. Next slide, please. Okay. Here's a little Gaza geography for you. So you see Israel borders Gaza on the northern and eastern sides. The western side is the Mediterranean. The circle indicates the border with Egypt. Egypt does not have an open border with Gaza. By the way, close to 100,000 Gazans worked in Israel prior to the war. Okay? So when they tell you this was an open-air prison, wasn't. When they tell you it was all poor refugees, it wasn't. When the leaders of Hamas are billionaires, those in Gaza and those living in Qatar. Unbelievable. That's 25 miles long, that whole thing. Only 25 miles. There are supposed to be close to 2 million people there. I'm going to give you two statistics about that should make you begin to wonder. The tunnels are estimated to be 450 miles long. 450 miles. For those of you who've had the pleasure, like I have, of riding the New York City subways, it's only 250 miles long. Let me give you another visual if you haven't ridden the subways. New York City to Cleveland is 460 miles. This is 450 miles. The other thing, you hear about the poor Gazans. The Europeans and the Americans have set up 35 hospitals in Gaza. Now, we found out that each and every hospital has been a storeroom for rockets, all kinds of RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, you name it. Each and every one. 35 hospitals. When I heard that, I used to work in healthcare. That's a lot of hospitals. 2 million people. It's a lot of hospitals. So I checked. Metropolitan Tel Aviv metro area. 4 million people. How many hospitals do we have? 4 hospitals. No one pays attention to any of this. Billions of those tunnels are not like, little this is concrete, this is steel. Next slide, please. This is one of the ones that makes me absolutely come close to stroking out. Yeshua, Jesus, was a Palestinian. Now, one of the leading lights of the squad, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, during Christmas, she came up with a proclamation, the idea that Jesus was a Jewish Palestinian. It's like being a definite maybe. What does that even mean? Now, Pastor Nick mentioned earlier that I live in Modi'in. That's actually not true. I actually live on Facebook. It's a lot cheaper. I'm not able to work. I don't know how many more months it'll be before I'm able to work again. So I live on Facebook. Now, one of the most popular posts I ever put up on Facebook is the very next slide. Next one, please. Okay, now the facts. Jesus was not Palestinian. He was a Jew from Judea. The region would only be renamed Syria Palestina, later Palestine, 100 years after Jesus' death by the Romans, who wanted to erase the Jewish connection to the land. Okay, so that was an incredibly popular post. That really depressed me because it meant it either articulated in a way that people found very helpful or gave them some information they never realized before. That's scary. That's scary. But you know what? People then get confused. If you stop and ask one of the Gazan residents or throughout Judea and Samaria, what does Palestine mean? They don't know. Again, the name came from the Romans who were looking to erase the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. So they named it after our arch enemy, the Plishtim, the Philistines. What does that name mean? Pleshet in Hebrew means invader. So they're calling their bogus country the invaders' country. That's exactly what they are. They were not in the land of Israel from time immemorial, but rather immigrated to Israel to a very large percentage at the end of the 19th century, because the Jewish community in Israel was creating industry and jobs. For as important as this slide may be, I actually like the very next one that makes a similar point better. You tell me what you think. Next slide, please. Are you a Palestinian? Should I say, a what? This is the world we're living in. Next slide, please. So we're at war. It is a very difficult war. It started off horrifically. Again, I'll give more of an analysis on Monday night of what happened and why and how. This occupies the thought of every single Israeli 24/7. It was barely 4 days into the war when I paid the first Shiva. Well, in America it's pronounced Shiva. In Hebrew it's Shiv'ah. Those are the first 7 days of mourning to a fallen soldier, to their family. This is a woman that took, those of you who belong to gyms, TRX, the suspension trainers. This woman was in a class, you nod to people, you don't know anything about them. Her husband was a lieutenant colonel, and actually he wasn't supposed to be in the Gaza area at all. He filled in for another one of his buddies. So this woman, her name is Shirley, which sounds like Shirley, but it means my song. She, her husband, the lieutenant colonel, and their 3 children were down there. Fortunately, she and the children got an evacuation by air. I've been to multiple memorials where they're returning the bodies of soldiers to be buried in the Modi'in cemetery, and we line the streets with flags. I've been there when the hostage families have come and other rallies. It is, it's almost unbearable when you read the little bios of each and every one of our fallen soldiers. And they're all the most amazing young men and women. And let me tell you something, everyone over the age of 21 is a reservist. That means that 4.5 months ago, they were planning to start university. They were working on their thesis for grad school. They were starting the new job in the high-tech company. They were planting their fields. They were planning a trip to India. And everything came to a halt. We called up 360,000 men and women. There are businesses in Israel that have shut down because they just don't have staff. People who had their own business weren't able to work. Now, people say to me, oh my God, Hanoch, you can't work. What are you going to do? It was like COVID, you're going to keep borrowing money to pay bills? Compared to many of my countrymen, I've got it easy. If the world were fair, it would be the people my age on the front lines in Gaza. So if I get hit by an RPG, but these young people, and the worst, it's when they print the letters home. You know, the classic, if you're reading this, it means I've fallen in combat. And they're all telling their families, don't cry, don't be sad. I fell defending the land of Israel. And then I see these demonstrations, and there are occasionally Jews at them. And there's one group, not in my name, and these individuals who, although born of a Jewish mother, have no more connection to being Jewish than buying a box of Manischewitz matzah in Publix. Okay? And they say, they're calling for a ceasefire. October 8th, the day after, in Times Square, calling for a ceasefire. We hadn't even done anything yet. The Americans held us back from a ground war for 3 weeks. We're very grateful for the American weapons resupply. We dread to see what the price will be. We had a prime minister in the early 2000s, Ehud Barak, who came up with a new doctrine. He's a highly decorated former general. We in Israel love our generals. Big mistake. He said Israel would no longer need as many tanks. We would no longer need as many artillery units, and we no longer had to produce within Israel our own artillery shells. We could get them from the Americans. Buy them from America. Why keep it? Now, already in 2006, we had a war with Lebanon, second Lebanese war, and we weren't able to do it with air power. America's found that repeatedly. A buddy of mine is a sergeant in Marine Corps, retired, who told me that urban guerrilla warfare is the worst form of warfare that you could ever possibly send troops to. This is what we're dealing with. And while the focus is on Gaza in the south, we have a far greater danger in the north. Hezbollah on the Lebanese border. They are infinitely stronger by a factor of 10 to 15 times stronger than Hamas. They have 150,000 missiles with guided, GPS elements to them. It's very, very, very nerve-wracking. Now in Israel, many of us wear these dog tags. And in English it says, bring them home now, the hostages. And in Hebrew it says, Halev shalanu shevui ba'aza. Our heart is captive in Gaza. Now, if you remember when I was here last winter, it was in January, and I kept checking my phone when it wasn't Shabbat, repeatedly, because I was waiting to hear from my daughter, my youngest daughter in New York City, when she was going into labor. And Baruch Hashem, she had a healthy baby boy. I became a Saba, or little Sabi. That's me. And Yonatan was born. Yoni. Doesn't have an English name. Yonatan Yosef Dov. And he just had his first birthday on February 7th. And he's about 3 weeks younger than Kfir Bibas, that adorable red-haired boy who was taken hostage with his brother and parents to Gaza. So when I was in New York and I'm holding Yoni, I'm thinking of two things. So first of all, I get to see him, only a couple of times a year. So I should be, just enjoying the time, just holding him. But I'm looking at him and I'm thinking of our baby who's a hostage. And I'm also thinking at 1 year old that in about 16 years, Yoni, who's Israeli, and they'll be coming to Israel again within a few years. He's an Israeli citizen. He'll be getting what's called his Tzav Rishon. That's the first notification of when he's going to be drafted. This little boy. This is our life. This is our world. But with the time remaining, I want to shift gears because I'm going to go into the war in more detail on Monday. People tell me, Hanoch, I'm doing everything I can. My pockets are empty. I've done everything I can. And this is in particular where people think I'm beating them up a little bit. But I want to give you a different perspective. I mentioned earlier I was involved in activism. By the time I was 20 years old, many of you have heard this already, I was already arrested on 3 different continents. That was an era where you could do a non-violent demonstration and make page 3 of the New York Times. We did incredibly creative stuff. I'll give you one example. Pan Am. You guys remember Pan Am Airlines? Was America's largest air carrier for a while. They were the only American airline flying flights to Syria. Syria at the time was really persecuting its small Jewish community. So we, filled with righteous indignation, wrote to Pan Am and told them they should stop flying to Syria until Syria released its Jews. They wrote us back telling us where to go and how to get there, and they were not referring to their air routes. We decided we're going to take revenge. There was a Pan Am office on 42nd Street and Vanderbilt Avenue, and it was right before Pesach, right before the Passover holiday. So we decided to visit the 10 plagues on Pan Am. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Splattered animal blood all over their windows. These massive plate glass windows. We had contracted with a lab supplier in New Jersey and got white mice, which we released. We threw in other substances I won't discuss, and we wanted to release locusts. Passover, locusts. Couldn't get locusts. You're in New York City. What can you easily access? Cockroaches. 1,000 cockroaches. They also came from the lab guys. People weren't collecting them at home and bringing them in. We got tremendous press. It was great, but it was a different world. Now, in America, you're living in because you identify with us, you're in danger. I know people that have removed Israeli decals from their cars. People have taken down Israeli flags from their homes. People have hid any symbols they have. By the way, we also wear these yellow bands. So bring them home. But I'll give you some examples of what you can do. First of all, it's great that people say, I donate money to Israel. It's wonderful. I don't want you just to be a donor. I want you to be a fundraiser. Pick a project that relates to you, something that you can relate to. Hatzalah, our first responders, $360 for a first responders unit of what they need. Go to your friends and relatives outside of Beit Tehila and say, hey, listen, we're contributing to this. I'm sending in the money on Monday. How much can I put you down for? My grandmother of blessed memory, the Yom Kippur War broke out. We were poor. She was poorer. She didn't have money to give, but she crocheted the covers of decorative pillows. She brought them to her little society meeting, people from her part of Europe, and they auctioned them off. You've been looking for an excuse to rid your garage of all that junk and have a garage sale, but you just couldn't, like you're like me, you couldn't bring yourself to do it, to clean up that much. Not a problem. Here's your reason. Israel needs it. Your state is blessed with good politicians. First of all, those listening in don't live in Florida. They don't even live in Texas. Write to your elected officials. Now you're going to say, well, wait a second. Senator Rubio, Governor DeSantis, they're good guys. Write them a letter telling them how much you support them, for how much they support Israel. And tell them, remind them not to allow the creation of something called a Palestinian state. You need to be more politically active. At city council meetings throughout America, the Hamas supporters are disrupting the meetings. It goes on and on and on. You need to look at how you're living in a totally different way. I'm now already working on presentations for when I come back in July, all educational elements about Israel, giving people the facts. Now, people will say, look, I don't know what information to share. Well, if you're on Facebook, write me. If you're not on Facebook, get my email address, write me. I'll write you back. I'll give you ideas. I spoke at a Baptist church the other night in Gibsonton. Thank you. I didn't even remember how to pronounce it. A woman came over and said, do you happen to have any homeschool curriculum teaching about Israel? An idea goes off in my head. I said, no, but I can put stuff together for you. I can help you. I can provide resources for your youth. This is how we need to think. We need to be thinking creatively out of the box. The woke agenda is so bizarre, and they're the only ones being heard. A woman wrote me recently and said, I want you to know I'm in my prayer closet every single day for Israel. I'm a bit at a disadvantage. I had no idea what a prayer closet meant. I didn't know if it was a literal closet, a figurative closet, but she was praying for Israel. So I encouraged her. And then I suggested gently, if you'll pardon the analogy, maybe it's time you came out of the closet. That's the whole thing. We're not standing together. Here's another thing. There was a massive rally a few months back in Washington, D.C., the largest rally in support of Israel in the history of the United States of America. There were close to 300,000 people there. To date, in all the congregations I've gone to, I only know 3 people that were there. What's fascinating, here's a key learning. I was told we didn't even hear about it. But that points to another problem/opportunity. You didn't hear about it because it was organized by major American Jewish organizations. If you're not connected to anyone in the Jewish community, y'all never would have heard about it. Why aren't you connected to Jewish people? Okay, I realize where I'm standing, but you don't know how much the exception to the rule you are. My airfare this time was $2,200. To the congregations that I go to, very often I'm the very first and only live Jew they've ever met. If I were to collect $1 from everyone who's meeting a Jew, me, for the very first time ever, I could offset my airfare. Unbelievable. It means being involved. Jewish people in this country are scared. By the way, you all should be scared too. Not scared petrified, but scared, kind of scared straight. Because what happens to Israel is going to happen here. We are only the tip of the iceberg. We're the canary in the mine shaft. Suicide bombings happen with us first. When I was involved in demonstrations and riots in New York City, we feared the NYPD, the police. They were tough guys, big billy clubs, and they loved to use them. Now, I think they're all hanging out at Dunkin' Donuts. I wish I had the opportunity, as you Americans do, to own a gun. I would never pass the psychological exam. You guys know that. Listen, we just touched upon things. We're going to go more into it on Monday. I want to thank you, thank Pastor Nick, thank everyone here and those watching and those who will watch. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. People ask me, so who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl? This is a few weeks ago when I first got to America, and I said, okay, first of all, tell me who's playing. I don't know. I don't follow American sports anymore. My life is Israel, the Jewish people, and those of you who love Israel as much as I do. That's my life. So thank you for letting me share a little bit. May Hashem bless you now and forever for all you do, and may God bless America.